So, good morning. Welcome back to the IESBA June board meeting, day 3. I hope that the discussions yesterday at the task force meetings were productive after the very intense day that we had yesterday. I hope that work stream 2 did not feel the pressure. And we are now heading to the third day of our board meeting. We will conclude the discussions around the workstream 2 proposals on ethics, standards for sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance by the end of this morning. And as you know, this afternoon, we will have a break and a board activity for which I hope you are all ready. So we will have a somehow lighter day today, which is good to restore some energy for the upcoming discussions tomorrow and after tomorrow. So I also hope that the idea of stopping by lunchtime makes you even more inspired and active. So let's start. Ken, unless you have any nothing. So Christelle, the floor is yours. I don't know if you want to start by recapping some recap of what we where we came yesterday, but it's of course your.
Okay. I don't know if it's needed by anybody to go in scope again. I was trying to get some additional points which are not scope related for fresh air this morning. Like Gabriela said, we felt the pressure, but we are keeping that pressure alive until we answer to you on Friday. So this is the right way to start. So these are drafting examples that we wanted to share with you that are not scope related, but to illustrate how we started to draft part 5 on ethics issues. These drafting are done under option B3, like Mark explained to you on Monday. And they were prepared in accordance with the characteristics set out in the public interest framework, notably the coherence with the overall body of IESBA standards, recognizing that the extant code is already a robust guide for ethical behavior when providing audit, review, and other assurance services. And as such, part 1 and 3 of the extant code were used as a baseline for developing the ethics requirement and application material in the new draft part 5. Clarity and conciseness. By using a language and structure that is understandable by the non-PAs. And in particular, draft part 5 follows the same building block approach than in the extant code, that is starting with the fundamental principles and the conceptual framework as the foundation of the new ethics and independent standards for assurance, for sustainability assurance. The language used is also ensuring an interpretation of part 5 that aligns with the current interpretation of extant part 1 and 3. Therefore, the language used in draft part 5 is as much as possible identical, notwithstanding the necessary adaptations that we will come on some of them later today. Implementability and enforceability by adopting an identical structure to the extent 1 and 3, with a clear distinction between requirements and application material. Further, since the new part 5 is part of the existing code, it will avoid the issues raised by IESBA members about the lengthy legal process of adopting standards or code in some jurisdictions. For ease of reference, we kept the numbering, like I think Sylvia said on Monday, the numbering of part 1 and 3 of the code. But it will need to be different, and we have discussed with workstream 1, for example, adding a 1 or a 5 in front of these equivalent paragraphs. And this way, the numbering of part 5 would be 1,000 or 5,000. So on this slide, this paragraph would become 1,300, 6A1, or 5,300, 6A1, meaning that we're to have a sort of those who already are fluid in navigating in the code could find their reference easier. Here, workstream 2 is proposing to add 2 new examples of self-review threads. We plan to ask for the reference group feedback regarding these examples, and eventually additional ones that would be useful. So we have taken the structure, we have kept as much as possible the vocabulary, the terms. We have added some examples that we felt were appropriate for the moment, but we need a feedback, and we will complete that in the next steps with the SRG. This is the status of our draft. Okay. There is a second example on next slide that we have, where we propose to, oh, sorry, thank you, Laura. We propose to add a new example of an advocacy thread. I don't know if you want me to go through these examples. Is it interesting for the board? It was just an illustration for our purpose. So here we propose to add an example of advocacy thread in terms of a sustainability assurance practitioner lobbying in favor of a particular sustainability related initiative on behalf of a sustainability assurance client. And we will seek other examples from the SRG. So what we are asking IESBA members is if they share our approach into structuring and approaching the draft.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Are there comments? What is being asked by Christelle is that the board comments on the proposed approach to the drafting, the concrete drafting, with some examples. Rania, please.
So I would add to the self-review threads in line with my comment yesterday. If the practitioner is involved in preparing or designing policies, procedures, and perhaps, I mean, I'm not sure if these are exhaustive examples, but perhaps if they are, then I would add one item where that is relatively open-ended, just to make sure that, you know, it's a very
here. Are you meaning the first additional example that we added on this?
Okay, so for example, so there's collecting, measuring, or managing sustainability information, reporting to generate the information. All I'm saying is that sometimes with sustainability, the assurance is on policies, procedures.
Oh yes, like you said, yes.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, okay, so I would add that, and perhaps if these are exhaustive examples, then I would keep one item.
No, it's always an illustration,
okay,
right?
Fine, yeah.
But we, of course, we don't want to stick with the examples that we have in part 1 and 3, and we want to add some meat
exactly
in the sustainability world.
Yeah. Then it's just a policy.
On purpose for the non-PAs and PAs, by the way, for sustainability environment. Yeah.
Great. So I will just add the one on the design of policies and the
Yes. Okay.
procedures. Yeah.
Well noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Ken.
Thank you, Gabriela. A couple of comments on the examples, and I understand these are really just indicative of direction, and the board will have an opportunity in September, presumably, to go through the detailed drafts carefully. But just looking at those examples of self-review threats, for example, just reactions really. The second bullet uses terminology that overlaps with terminology that is in the IESBA standard, ISA 5000, and I would just urge a little bit of caution. For example, we use the term subject matter, and that overlaps with the IESBA's concept of underlying subject matter, and data that is used to generate sustainability information that then forms the subject matter of the assurance engagement. So maybe there's a different way to formulate the idea without getting entangled with the technical.
So everything that was in black was already in the extant code. So I suppose it was coherent, but maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe
and we'll
not
make
because
sure that we do not create confusion.
Yes, because in the assurance framework of IESBA, it is a subject matter that is used to produce sustainability information, whereas here we're equating the sustainability information with the subject matter. So practitioners that are using both the IESBA standard and the code might find a bit of inconsistency there. So just take another look at it. And the fourth bullet on the screen, I would just ask if workstream 2 could maybe be careful with the articulation of the examples and be precise in the language, because if you were to read it cold, it could be that it's any certification service to any client, and therefore what is the relevance necessarily to this the engagement at hand. So you want to link it to the service that's provided to the entity that is subject to the assurance. Yes. So just a bit of precision in the language, I think will help the clarity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. Luigi, please.
Thank you. I was reading this example, and I'm a bit confused about the third and the fourth one. Starting from the fourth one, I think, but I'm still struggling in understanding what are the services related to certification services we are dealing here. And I think that some clarity in this respect it is needed in order to understand the perimeter. And then probably we also need to, I think, qualify such services if they are relevant with respect to the subject matter of sustainability assurance, because I think there could be many types of services that could be relevant or not.
Okay, I note your point that either the example is really a blocking threat, or it is an example of threat that needs to be analyzed and to see if it's really an effective threat. And then we have to, we need to be more specific that it is a certification service that is key to the sustainability assurance, of course, and then you fall into an effective threat. But I understand what you mean. If this is to be the real threat, we should be more specific. Do you want to add something? No, that's okay.
Yeah, because reading other example, it seems to me that by reading the other example, I conclude, yes, there is a risk. Reading these two, I don't know, frankly, but probably there is some need of more analysis, I think. And even on the third one, it is the same. It is not clear to me which are the services you are pointing in order to trigger this review risk, because it should not be all the services provided in the market, but there are probably conditions that trigger this potential self-review.
Yeah, the example we were thinking about, but again, I know that we should maybe be more specific, etc. Was that, for example, a sustainability assurance provider has before rendered some reporting services to elaborate the data that now a provider, a supplier is giving to our client and is subject to the assurance because of the scope of the sustainability information to be provided by the client. He should take into account some of these information coming from his supply chain. And there is a major item coming from there, which was elaborated by the assurance provider. Is there a self-review threat there?
Can I? No, I agree. Let's say explained in this way, I think it is, to me at least, it is clear. Probably, there is a need to let's clarify better.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Luigi and Christelle. Any other comments? Oh, okay.
So next point is on NOCLAR. We would like to ask the board your view on two issues relating NOCLAR. The first is on this slide and then another one on the next slide. Extant section 360 includes two groups of provisions that deal with essentially the same issues regarding NOCLAR. One is under the heading Audit and Financial Statements, and the other is under the heading Professional Services other than audits and of financial statements. Since one of the objectives of the project is to set standards that are equivalent to those for audit engagements, the workstream 2 proposes to develop equivalent provisions in part 5, using the provisions for audit of financial statements as a basis, and adding certain provisions from the professional services other than audit of financial statements where appropriate. In particular, we propose to add the provisions on communicating the matter to the entity's external auditor. Those paragraphs are not included in the extent provision applicable to audit. It's informing yourself, but should be added to part 5, as the sustainability assurance practitioner may need to communicate the NOCLAR to external auditor. Under those provisions related to communicating the matter to the entity's external auditor, we propose not to include in part 5 this last bullet in extant paragraph 360-34 A1, as a non-PA should not be required to have that kind of knowledge or sensitivity about the materiality aspects of a financial audit. So if the board can validate our approach on that point.
Thank you, Christelle. Laurie, I mean, you want to speak, please?
Yeah, just one comment. I mean, look, I think this makes a lot of sense. If you can go back to that last slide.
Yes, yes.
I understand totally the point about not imposing on people because they don't have the information and likely the skill set to assess materiality. But I wonder if you just need to consider relevant factors to consider some different language that alludes to the potential significance of the matter. Okay, not necessarily financial materiality, right? Because That's all.
Not an easy point.
Not an easy point. I'm sorry. Yes.
Unless it is in some kind of relationship with the ISA 5000, maybe.
Yeah, something to think about. I mean, we're struggling conceptually with this also in the experts work stream. So if we have any brainstorms in this over the next month, we'll let you know. But I do think the significance of the event is clearly a factor to consider. The language around it is extremely challenging.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Luigi?
Mark, please.
Oh, Mark.
Thank you. So I'd be very happy to go with Laurie's proposal of significance, because the point I was going to make is that actually, although it wouldn't necessarily be reasonable to expect a sustainability practitioner to understand financial audit materiality, materiality is quite a significant and quite a vexed concept in the whole sort of sustainability landscape. So I still think that whilst I agree with your proposal to take out the bottom bullet in that it refers to the audit of a client's financial statements, you should actually consider retaining something that says the likely materiality of this matter in the context of the sustainability engagement, because that would then still be relevant. And I think, you know, either that or Laurie's point on significance would pick that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Luigi, please.
I'm supportive of this approach. I have just 2 comments. First one is acknowledging that this audit and assurance on sustainability have a different profile under many respects. I also am wondering whether, in particular, NOCLAR, probably also other things, but in particular, NOCLAR would also need to trigger additional considerations in terms of potential risks, of potential factors for an assurance practitioner to consider. It is easy to think about example where NOCLAR events could trigger consideration on many bad things that could happen in this space, including greenwashing, which are also relevant for the auditor when performing the audit and financial statement, but it is important in a different way. So probably it is a matter, I don't know, it is a matter for you to consider whether you would like to explore additional consideration relating to the consequences of a potential NOCLAR. Second point is we are correctly considering the communication, the need for the practitioner to consider informing or communicating to the auditor. I also wonder whether it is the case for the auditor when identifying a NOCLAR to consider informing the practitioner. Now we are working at a scheme where we have 2 types of audit and assurance, which are at the same level in terms of public interest. So I wonder whether we should not think about this type of communication.
Yeah, very interesting proposition. On the first one, it was evident for us that we could not ask a sustainability assurance provider to have the same sensibility on financial materiality and financial audit, etc. What you're saying is, okay, let's take the sustainability assurance materiality and then ask the assurance provider to go to the auditor. Do we filter that, or is it a way to conclude that whenever there is something to say on the assurance engagement, it has to be shared not only with the management, but with the auditor?
No,
I'm a little bit...
No, Christelle, I was saying...
It could be there.
I was saying another thing. Let's say easy example, school example. Sorry, if there are NOCLAR affecting environmental law, labor law, and so on, a simple let's say a simple logic would bring to consider whether there is a risk of greenwashing, for example.
Yeah.
No. Which is less automatic, probably, in the space of the audit, where the interest is always linked to the financial information. So what I'm saying is that I agree to transpose the NOCLAR provision into the sustainability assurance space. I wonder whether additional analyses are required to the practitioner in order to make sure that certain events are not so relevant, for example, to stop providing these services or to implement additional remediation and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. Sadia, please.
So I too am happy with the proposal of going in line with audit. I'm happy that you clarified the issue of those charged with governance and the communication. I think it's a very important point that we'll have to bring forward. I also would like to retain that last bullet, even though it will be hard to draft. I think it's important to bring that link. And my final point is that as we move these amendments forward in part 5, I think we must keep cognizant that we're actually elevating part 3. So NOCLAR is now audit in. For a professional accountant who's reading part 3, they'll have to recognize that audit and sustainability assurance engagements are being held in the similar light, and just spearheading it as a consequential amendment will be important.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadia. Hector, please.
Thank you. Starting from not a professional knowledge of what NOCLAR entails, but just a superficial understanding. My doubt was in line with what Luigi was saying, in terms that if the assurance professional finds that there is greenwashing going on, the benchmark against that determination would not necessarily be law and regulation. It may be internal policies. It may be declarations made by the company in terms of commitments. It may be perhaps a different set of standards from which you would normally in an audit look for where are the rules. In this case, it would be the company making those rules, making those commitments and saying, this is what we do, this is what we follow. I'm not sure if it makes sense to recognize that there is a difference there, because audit is a regulated industry. Financial statements follow IFRS, and here we are in a different scenario where companies are saying, we are good citizens because we do this, we have committed to do that. And the assurance provider will have to go into those documents that are not applicable to every other company, but to that company in particular. I don't know if it makes sense. Sorry for my ignorance.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just was discussing with Jeff if there was another part, because NOCLAR is something specific. If there was a sort of intermediary section where we would address those gray zones that we have. And sorry, and Mark has read something.
That was a helpful prompt from Hector, because I think it helps to unpick the complexity of what we're asking you to do. Because actually, I think there are 3 strands to this. Firstly, there's NOCLAR in the context of the audit of the financial statements. Secondly, there is, as you say, the disclosures of sustainability type reporting, which may have NOCLAR implications too. But then there's a third strand, which is your sustainability disclosures also have financial implications for your financial reporting. So it can have a knock-on impact on the financial statement. So we've got to make sure that in developing these factors, we recognize all three levels that potentially you could cut across from a sustainability perspective, that it's not just financial reporting, not just narrative reporting, it's the interaction of both. And that's what makes this so complicated to draft. And that's what makes the sort of materiality challenge so difficult as well. So I think it's probably something that we'll sort of have to all go away and sit with sort of cold towel wrapped around head until we can work out what it is. But I think this is probably one of the most important considerations that we need to make in developing this part of the code.
Thank you, Mark. Chana.
Just adding on to Mark's comments, with no cloud, it works because there's assumption that you're breaching certain laws and regulations, and then there is authority that you could ultimately report the matter to once you have followed the internal processes and nothing is happening. So like to Hector's example, if it's sort of a commitment the company has given to, I mean, that would be like you would have to sort of look at the reporting mechanism, because you could only probably report internally up to the board. There won't be an outside authority. It's not like anti-money laundering that there's an outside authority who can take action. So we may have to be careful on the reporting mechanisms.
Thank you. Yeah, Hector.
Just to add a small caveat, in some jurisdictions there is law being passed on greenwashing, and you may have somebody to report to. I'm not sure if it has the teeth and the muzzle of a anti-money laundering agency, but there are some sorts of channels to report. In my own country, we're having a law passed these days on greenwashing. So there is a attribution of authority to the securities market regulator with respect to listed companies making false claims on greenwashing. So in some jurisdictions, you might have a channel. In others, I agree that you don't have anything.
Thank you, Hector and Chana. Luigi? Oh, okay. So Ken.
Thank you, Gabriel. Just on the last point we just discussed on no-claw and this connection with greenwashing, I think we have to be clear that the no-claw section really deals with non-compliance with laws and regulations. So as long as there is a law or regulation that addresses greenwashing, it is scoped in. If there is an instance of greenwashing that's addressed under law or regulation, the no-claw section will be applicable. On the other hand, if there isn't a law or regulation that speaks directly to the issue of greenwashing, then the assurance practitioner would not be under the no-claw sections, but will be within the rest of the code, in terms of its, the practitioner's ethical responsibilities to address the instance of greenwashing. So I think the clarity around the scoping is important. Is it an issue of non-compliance with law and regulation, or is it not? If it is not, then it's for the rest of the code, to address it. I guess my second point is perhaps a more substantive point, and that is how we are transposing the no-claw provisions that sit in the code currently addressed to accountants in public practice, who may or may not be the auditor of the entity. And we're moving that section to the sustainability assurance context. Now, in the audit context, it's always been the focus on the audit. So first of all, if the practitioner is the auditor and is carrying out the audit engagement, there's a whole suite of provisions that addresses the practitioner's responsibility to respond to the instance of no-claw. If the practitioner isn't the auditor, but is performing a non-audit service relative to other clients, the no-claw section, as it stands today,
has a number of requirements or responsibilities, if you will, for the practitioner to respond to the instance of no clause, and there are communication requirements, which of which one is communicating with those charged with governance, as you have it on the screen. And my point, I guess, is that we have to be we have to analyze the scenarios very carefully, because I don't know if you have the requirement in the slides, but this piece of guidance is addressing a requirement for a professional accountant in performing a non-audit service for a client that isn't an audit client or a component of an audit client of the firm. So in other words, the firm is performing a non-audit service for another client, which isn't an audit client or a component of an audit client of the firm. It's a non-audit service, and the no clause section imposes some responsibilities. If we were to transpose this into part 5, well, if the requirement is going to use the same language, in other words, a practitioner is performing a non-audit service, well, a non-audit service will include a sustainability assurance engagement. So are we doubling down or not? So I think we need to bring, before we even look at the guidance, we have to make sure that we know what the requirement is, and we have appropriately scoped it, and that it is addressing both accountants and non-accountants, right? So I'm not having full visibility in terms of how the requirement is let's say designed to cover both situations, and whether we're going to refer to a non-audit service, or is it going to be a service that's other than a sustainability assurance engagement, right? So I think there's a bit of an analysis that needs to be done to make sure that we've covered all the possible scenarios, to make sure that we're not, introducing inconsistencies or doubling down on the same requirement that perhaps it's in another section. And basically just take another look at the bullet points. Should we be referring to communication with the external auditor? Because in an audit context, we can understand that the focus is on the audit and the external auditor. But if we were to move this section into the sustainability assurance context, should the communication in fact be directed to the assurance practitioner rather than the external auditor, or both?
Thanks, Ken. I think what the workstream 2 had done when they looked at the no clause provisions in part 3 and moving it to part 5, because in those parts is split into whether if you're the auditor, this is what you do, and then if you're not the auditor, this is what you do. And this part sits in the section, or the part that is not when you're not the auditor. So what workstream 2 had done is they've basically used a bit that is for the auditor, and just basically change the language to as a sustainability assurance practitioner, because we felt that that is a more stringent approach, and it more lines up to part 4A and independence, what we're trying to do. But because they're not the auditor of the financial statements, that's why we added this section into the part that we've changed. Because of course, if you're in part 3, if you're already the auditor, you don't need that because you're reporting to yourself. But if you're the sustainability assurance practitioner, we felt that there may be instances where you should consider reporting to the auditor of the financial statements. So that's why we've added it. But we'll look into that again and make sure that it makes sense. Because I recognize that also even just having some reflection that we do expect the sustainability assurance practitioner might have other services to that same client that we need to consider that they might have come across other no-clause incidents. But we'll look into that. But that's the rationale. Basically, we picked the part that was for auditor and we change it for sustainability assurance practitioner.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful when you bring no-clause back to the board in September is perhaps to have a table setting out the scenario for both. We're talking from the perspective of part 5. what are the NOCLAR provisions or the requirements for the assurance practitioner who is the auditor or who is an auditor? And what are the corresponding requirements if the practitioner is not an accountant?
Okay, thank you very much, Ken and Jeff. Sanjeev, please.
Thank you. Jeff, one small question. When we bring in NOCLAR to part 5, are we also considering a communication from the auditor to a non-PA on some issues which may be of relevance to him, in public interest? So take a scenario where a non-PA is the sustainability assurance provider. The auditor is somebody else. The auditor has come across some NOCLAR, defaults, if I may say so. Is there a responsibility on the auditor to communicate with the sustainability assurance provider on those issues?
For the moment, not. But I think it's the Luigi's suggestion. So we took the point, and it's well relevant. I think Sadia was supporting it also.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Yes. So I understand that NOCLAR is, is strictly non-compliance with rules and regulations. But my question is, perhaps just for the board to consider, in the context of sustainability engagements, could there be an expectation on the practitioner in the event that they become aware of a non-compliance or suspected non-compliance in other areas of sustainability? Might there be an expectation of them to communicate this? So I think because we are, very specifically in the area of sustainability and social responsibility and good governance, assuming a practitioner, for instance, is reporting on climate, but then they become aware of issues in, I don't know, gender or governance, or just something for the board to consider.
In fact, what I hear here is it would be interesting or in public interest that auditor and sustainability assurance provider become to some extent partners for the public interest and therefore support each other. That's what I hear here. There might be some of, we can either take the point on some specific issues or put the point as something that should be in the general practice of these two agents to support the public interest. It's interesting, I think, because either we take it by some, we are quite prudent and we take it by some only some little doors, important, the most important maybe, or we put as a proposition that there is a clear partnership discussion that they should be discussing so that each of them can understand if there is an issue that they should take on board on their professional responsibilities. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
If I could just quickly add also, thank you, Rania, for that question. In terms of the responsibilities that Ken had also mentioned earlier, it's about non-compliance with laws and regulations, and it's not, of course, restricted to just any environmental issues or any particular sustainability issues or sustainability. If that's so, it is about essentially strictly non-compliance with laws and regulations and the responsibility of the practitioner under that provision. So it's quite broad in that sense.
No, yeah, I understand that. That's why I started by saying I realize that NOCLAR is restricted to non-compliance with laws and regulations. However, in the context of sustainability, if the practitioner becomes aware of, let's say, false representations made pertaining to other areas that they are not providing assurance on. Do you think, will there be an expectation from users or the public, I mean, from an ethical point of view, of them, to disclose this or to make it?
It is already, that's what I'm trying to say. It's not just sustainability. You can come across financial fraud, and it is under NOCLAR that you have to, yes.
Yeah, but financial fraud is
anything, and non-compliance with laws and regulations, essentially. Any laws.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, what if it's not within the law? Because I mean, when you talk about sustainability, much of, in fact, if you look at the literature on sustainability, it says that really sustainability is not just, there is no one body of text or laws on sustainability. And sometimes sustainability requirements or expectations are not even part of any form of law or regulation. Sometimes it's just disclosures or attestations. So I think the problem with what we're dealing with is that sustainability is a very, very broad area. For example, if an entity is claiming to be, for example, making claims with regards to, for example, gender equality or reducing gender pay gaps, or just giving an example, or more inclusion, or whatever. I mean, so it does not have to be part of the law, but they are making a representation. They are claiming to be, let's say, doing something committed to the community, or to whatever, to better the community. So all I'm saying is that if the practitioner becomes aware of this, I know that this is not covered in NOCLAR, but I'm saying that in the context of sustainability, might there be an expectation from the public to
I think that's similar to the point that Hector has brought up, and Ken had responded earlier, is that we do have, then you go to the rest of the code. In particular, you have part 1 and all the fundamental principles in terms of, when you come across those sort of instances.
Okay. Paul, I don't know if your point is on this same issue.
Yeah, precisely. I think I hear what Rania is asking, but I think if anything, part of the problem we're facing is because there's such a multiplicity of standards and reporting requirements around sustainability. How do we, the measuring sticks are so varied, you can't have a third party assess whether it's right or wrong. So it's very, to me, it sounds very treacherous to go beyond NOCLAR, because NOCLAR is prescribed. Are you non-compliant with prescribed standards? Sustainability is very unprescribed. So when they go outside of the NOCLAR box, it's very dangerous, I think, from my take. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Ken.
Yeah, this conversation, I must admit, is giving me a sense of unease and discomfort, because I do remember I worked on the NOCLAR project, and it was a 5-year project. And I'm just concerned, so they will be able to get to the end of it within the next 6 months. But to be a bit more serious, I think what we excuse me, Rania does raise a very important question, and that is a question of the scoping of the laws and regulations. And I think that's what I would ask Workstream 2 to look into. Because whilst NOCLAR deals with laws and regulations, it's not all the laws and regulations in the entire world, right? It is very precise in terms of the perimeter of the laws and regulations in what is specified in the current section 360. It's laws and regulations that are recognized to have a direct effect on the determination of material amounts and disclosures in the financial statements. So how do we translate this into a sustainability assurance context? Because we're not longer tied to the financial statements. The object of the assurance or the subject of the assurance engagement is the sustainability information. It's not the financial statements. So we have to have a corresponding mapping of those laws and regulations, to your point, in the sustainability context. But that's the first part of the scoping. The second part is any other laws and regulations which, although they don't have a direct effect on the, in this case, sustainability information, might be fundamental to the operating aspects of the client's business, to its ability to continue its business or to avoid material penalties. And maybe that goes to your point, Rania, which is basically anything that potentially could impact the entity as a business. Exactly, sustainability, you know, and you take your pick as to which area of sustainability. So I think this is a critical issue of the scoping, and we need to be able to map this into the sustainability context, because we shouldn't be tied to the audit in that sense.
Thank you very much, Ken. Mark.
I think that's very helpful, Ken. But I think for the purposes, as you say, of trying to precisely sort of put a boundary around NOCLAR, as you say, we need to understand what the legal framework is that we're testing to make sure that people are complying with. But I think part of the wider question that Rania is asking is covered in any case by the fundamental principles of not allowing yourself to be associated with misleading information. And so that would have a wider thing of a company making claims or a sustainability practitioner supporting a company making claims that are unsubstantiated. Well, that would already be covered elsewhere within the code. And we've got to be very careful not to stretch the boundary of NOCLAR into covering the misleading reporting thing. So if anything, I know that the work stream has to carefully consider how to bring NOCLAR into Section 5, but it shouldn't overbring NOCLAR into Section 5. It should bring an equivalent NOCLAR regime and recognise that there are wider issues that are already covered elsewhere within the fundamental principles of the code.
Thank you very much, Mark and all. This has been a very interesting conversation. I fully agree with the idea that we should not stretch the boundaries of NOCLAR, and it's very important to listen to Ken, who is completely aware of the meaning and the purpose of this project, and understand that. And I fully agree with that. I understand Rania's concerns, saying, well, but firms, companies can be claiming that they are doing this and that. If you read Financial Times this morning, there is a company who has been sued and stopped because it was saying things that did not reflect reality. But this is really, like Mark was saying, not probably not about NOCLAR, but about other things. But what I would like to highlight was the same perception that I had as Christelle, that there is something here around the table, a request or a claim for more communication, more information, additional ways of making sure that if anything is identified which is not right, there are instruments or tools in place that allow this information to flow. And we are, again, and I think that these discussions in the work stream 2 always bring us there, always, again, slowly slipping into the corporate governance area. This idea of the auditor and the sustainability practitioner working in tandem and being connected gatekeepers, or splitting the gatekeepers' responsibility among different actors, I think it's really getting some strength and voice here. Not sure that we can do anything at this stage, but I think that this idea of, well, auditor and sustainability practitioner, should there be something that would allow them or urge them to communicate anything? I don't know, I'll leave it for the work stream to reflect. But anyway, I think that we should keep an open list of issues that over the next few years, I think we will have to come back to, and have discussions with the corporate governance community and etc. Because there is really here an open field of areas that we might explore. So thank you for that. Well, and Christelle, I don't see. Oh, James, sorry, I was not. Are you hesitating?
No. I'm letting you finish. Thank you.
Are you afraid?
I know we are trying to deal and idealistically find clarity of a scope and requirements around NOCLAR for sustainability. But Gabriella's last point is very important. As we go to market, the board should feel very comfortable about positioning itself and being clear how it's positioning itself relative to this area. Claire, if you think about the life of the board, is a relatively new area. Even though we've got our standards, we're learning about how that's being implemented, how it's being understood. So when we approach Claire into sustainability, the board should be very comfortable to express its position that if it's taking a conservative approach, meaning we're deliberately being clear around narrowing it, it's an area that we will continue to monitor, but you're positioning your entry with respect to it in a very narrow way. If you choose to do that, that allows at least some clarity of how you're positioning Claire. I don't think you're going to get answers to all of your questions, but if the board, this is more a strategic positioning. So when going into the marketplace, it's defining and scoping how the board has positioned itself in a very difficult area. And I think as you go forward, I'd prefer a pragmatic solution than a perfect solution when you're drafting your provision. So just as you contemplate solving this very difficult dilemma.
Thank you very much, James. Christelle, Jeff, Laura, reactions or?
Well, I like ambitious programs, so I'm happy. But so I understand what you say. Maybe we'll find a satisfactory proposition for the board. What I propose is to be ambitious in our proposition and then to see if board have restrictions and we'll see. Yeah, we'll deal with that in September, hopefully. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christelle.
I propose we continue.
Okay.
So this is Gabriela's favorite subject. So back in March, the work stream 2 proposed to limit the scope of the sustainability project in terms of sustainability reporting to developing ethics standards that would apply to PAs only for the purposes of this project. I remind you there were several reasons for this. The regulatory call from IOSCO for profession agnostic standards only covers sustainability assurance, not reporting activities. More engagement with regulators was deemed necessary to understand if they are planning to enact a legal duty for all preparers of sustainability information to comply with ethics requirements. Since the extant code standards for financial reporting by PAs are generally not backed by legal duties at the national level, a possible expansion of that scope should also consider enforceability issues. More engagement with regulators and other stakeholders was deemed necessary to understand the implication of this topic in terms of regulation versus corporate governance. So whilst we were acknowledging that there is, of course, public interest that all preparers are subject to the same robust ethics standards, the board generally supported that this project focuses on ethics standards for PAs only in light of time and resource constraints. So this topic was discussed at the 4 global roundtables, where the participants overall agreed that all preparers of sustainability information should abide by ethics standards, given that preparers and those charged with governance are the first line of defense against corporate malfeasance. However, participants shared our doubts about the enforceability of such standards on the non-PAs should the IESBA develop such standards. The views differed on which path should be followed for the development of those standards. For instance, corporate governance codes comply or explain types of mechanism, or the entity responsible for developing those standards, for instance, the professional bodies or the companies themselves. The overall opinion was that the first step in this area must be taken by regulators, and there was no strong support for the IESBA to develop profession-agnostic ethics standards for the sustainability reporting now. So, taking into account the feedback from the IESBA, the CAG, the roundtables, Workstream 2 reiterates its proposal to develop ethics standard for sustainability reporting by PAs only under the current project. We suggest that IESBA considers as a separate work stream the development of guidance material based on part 2 of the code for preparers of sustainability information who are not PAs for voluntary adoption by entities. This proposal recognizes the public interest underpinning sustainability reporting because the first step for quality assurance is having quality disclosures by companies. If IESBA issues guidance for non-PAs, companies could then adopt it on a voluntary basis. This in turn would give a signal to the market that those companies are following high ethics standards when preparing their sustainability disclosures. This could bring them some benefits in terms of obtaining good quality assurance for those disclosures, because the assurance provider would have a higher degree of trust in the information prepared by the company. In summary, even though the proposal is at this moment to revise part 2 of the code for sustainability reporting by PAs only, we do not intend to stop the work here. We do not suggest waiting for a regulatory call, and we intend to continue the dialogue with all stakeholders to see how best progress this topic. We had a feedback from the NSS on this item. GICPA agreed with Workstream 2's proposal to, at this moment, develop standards for sustainability reporting by PAs only. And I think the approach that we are proposing made sense for them. So we are kindly requesting our board for the strategic direction of the board to determine the scope of our work for now and the going forward in a definitive way, if possible, under this project.
Thank you very much, Christelle. What Workstream 2 is asking the board is to take position and decide, if possible, on this direction of not developing profession agnostic standards for sustainability, ethics standards for sustainability reporting. This is, but to keep it open for further consideration,
including in terms of tone at the top, that we for a project proposal we decide on the scope, but we also as an organization commit ourselves to continue on the subject and promote the what we are doing for PAs as a good practice, and therefore work in the public interest without waiting to have all amendments to the code for non-PAs, for example, if it comes. Yeah.
Thank you, Christelle. So before we start the discussion, allow me 1 minute for some comments. First, Christelle started by saying that this is my favorite topic. I don't know if it's my favorite topic. I just feel that I have a special responsibility in making sure that the board is as attentive and focused on this part of the work as on the rest of the work, because on the assurance side, we have been called by the regulatory community, is very much at the center of the discussion for many reasons that I'm not going to list now. And sustainability reporting is historically, traditionally left more hidden and in the shadow. So given the importance that I think that we all recognize around the table to this part of the sustainability information supply chain, and the discussion that we had in March in Abu Dhabi was absolutely clear about that. I think that we have the responsibility of making sure that the discussion on this topic is as deep and meaningful as the good discussions, very good discussions that we are having on sustainability assurance. So it's not a matter of preference, it's just my responsibility of raising the attention to a topic which is actually extremely important. I'm not going to repeat why. I think that you are all aware, but this is the first, where it all begins, where the problems begin, and at the same time, and not subject to a precise and specific regulatory framework, which makes the risks higher at this stage than on the assurance side. Secondly, allow me a very quick comment, and please don't take it as criticism or whatever. This is in a very constructive perspective, and Christelle, with whom I've been speaking, knows that very well. I think that we have to be a little bit careful with the language used. Again, just like yesterday when I was saying, it's probably better not to put there, highlight the idea not applicable, saying that we are not developing standards for non-professional accountants, that this is for professionals only. I think that this draws a too bold line between ones and the others and puts it black and white. On sustainability assurance, we are developing standards for non-professional accountants. On sustainability reporting, we are developing standards for professionals only. While looking at the reality at the company's level, is that what we have is a group of people, some of them accountants, by the way, the minority, some of them non-accountants working in preparing and reporting sustainability information. So nothing prevents them from voluntarily, or the company or whoever, to say, you all are sitting in the same room doing the same things, and you have to abide by the same standards. So my second note is out from the start. Ask the work stream to work a little bit in this language, and I think that what we have to tell the world is, for sustainability reporting, we are not going, if this is the decision of the board, we are not going to develop these standards in a profession agnostic way, and I think that's enough. And the justifications that we have support that approach, but I'd be careful in saying this is for professionals only. This is not applicable to the others, etc., because it separates the two realities in a way which is a little bit too rigid. Well, and for the time being, I'll stop here. I may have other considerations afterwards, but I want to listen to the board, of course. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I think the work streams proposals are a well thought out solution to dealing with a very significant challenge of developing the code so that it supports sustainability reporting and assurance. And in a sense, I am supportive of an approach that deals with the most important aspects first. And I do believe that aligns with the considerations that we make around the public interest framework. Specifically in the context of preparation of sustainability information, this is a fast developing area with lots of different practitioners in this space, and they are working with new and fast developing frameworks and all sorts of reporting requirements that are being developed by companies, that are being developed by all sorts of groups and by standard setters themselves. The reason I'm comfortable with the proposal and fully agree with Christelle that, you know, there is ongoing work potentially for this work stream to further consider what it might do, is that ultimately, if we follow the logic flow that work stream 1 considered, its priority was publicly available information that's used for decision making. And in the context of sustainability information, although publicly available information could be prepared by a range of different people operating in different roles, ultimately, when it's brought together in a corporate report or an annual report of a company, the owner of that process is likely to be the CFO or a professional accountant. And so therefore there is an overarching accountability and an overarching enforcement mechanism to be able to take action in the public interest if there is something wrong with the quality and the veracity of that information, or the company is putting out information which includes greenwashing or any of the other things that the board has been concerned about. So again, bearing in mind the time and the resources that we have available and all that has to be done, I support this as a balanced proposal, which I think addresses the most significant risks in an effective way and still leaves appropriate tension in the framework to be able to ensure public accountability and to take necessary measures to support proper confidence in what companies are reporting. So you certainly have my support in what you're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And it's good that you mentioned the CFO, because I think it's going to be a critical element in this discussion now or in the future. Also because you mentioned there is always an overarching accountability which lies with the CFO, but the CFO can be or not an accountant, and you are already in a completely different framework and level of responsibility and etc. But thank you for raising that, because I think it's a path that we will have to explore. Luigi.
As mentioned yesterday, I think that this is a very significant area and a very significant task that we need to consider. It is also true, and you convince me, that it is best to have one step per time in order to make sure that we reach the objectives in an orderly way. My view is the fact that even today, as mentioned before, those dealing with financial information are not necessarily professional accountants. So we have an issue here, even now. These may increase in a very near future due to the fact that the expertise required in this field are completely different. And so I agree with the approach. I support the approach. I also think that as a matter of priority, when thinking about future or following project, this should be kept into consideration. Even, of course, we are still under the exposure draft of the strategic work plan, but assuming that one of the projects is listed there is the one relating to CFO would have support from the respondents. I think that these should be coupled with this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Junpei.
Thank you very much for your hard work and presentation. I'd like to support the proposed scope of ethics standards for sustainability reporting, including limited scope of PAs, because of the timeliness and priorities in the standard development. I think this is reasonable because currently non-PAs preparers of financial statements are not subject to the ethics rules. On the other hand, the sustainability reporting is getting matured, Stakeholders' needs are also changing. So I think continuous communication with stakeholders are important to maintain the code properly. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Junpei. Sadia, please.
I just wanted to get a clarification on attachment 4D. Is this consequential amendments to the current part 2, or are we thinking about incorporating it into part 5? Okay, so I'm happy with that we're not going to incorporate it, so it's clear what's applicable. The other question I have for the working group is, have you all considered a new subsection specifically for sustainability reporting? I think the public interest in the section and some of the themes that we currently we're seeing coming through, sublet greenwashing, those type of things might be applicable for PAs at the moment, and the code doesn't provide clear direction on that. And then coming back to whether part 2 applies to professional accountants or we keep it professional agnostics. I understand what we're going to come to. It's prioritizing. I just find it difficult that there might be a boutique firm that might be doing both assurance and reporting. And in one case, they will be following different streams of ethics considerations. And that is where the nuance comes in. Why are they only following it for assurance providers, but they aren't following it in other work streams? And if we could hook that on, even as application material in part A, that as you consider these ethical provisions in your conceptual framework approach, don't limit it just to assurance, but actually think about it holistically. And it came back to this thing about you have to have an ethical framework, and you can't choose when you're using it. And if that is brought in, then I think that we try to move the conversation on ethics holistically forward and not just focusing on one stream.
Thank you very much for those comments, Sadia. I think that goes into the core of the question or of the issue, and also highlights the need for some kind of consistency in terms of the robustness of the system, whether it is professional agnostic or not, but in terms of the robustness of the standards and the completeness of the standards for both areas. And thank you for that. Chana.
Thanks, Gabriela. So I would like to also support the approach. As Mark said, ultimately for the listed companies, there would be a CFO, and most probably it will go via the CFO, who is in most cases would be accountant, but even if they are not accountant, most developed countries have corporate governance codes, which also put in some responsibilities on officers of the company. So on that basis and the time constraints, I would also like to support the proposal put forward by the work stream. Just a question was, if the guidance material is developed, how long would that take? Because would we come out with a ED, and by the time we finalize it, we also have guidance material available? No? So is the plan that we wait till we develop the standard and then do the guidance material?
If we want to promote the code as accurate for both PAs and non-PAs in terms of the reporting landscape, I think we should have something ready. So the first readiness will be when we issue the exposure draft. Is it the appropriate moment? I don't know. This is
I think Laura and I might have a heart attack if we're going to have the guidance material ready for the exposure draft. But it is a very important point, Chana, in terms of guidance material, because it is absolutely necessary from a adoption and implementation perspective, and we will of course work alongside Workstream 1 as well in terms of any guidance material. But that's something that we need to start thinking about, because we can't just wait until we finish to start, oh, what should we develop? But of course, we can't develop stuff until we can't release things until we have finalized the material. But there may be other little things that we can do in terms of, for instance, when we release the ED, we will have to do a lot of stakeholders outreach, including those who are not from the accountancy profession. That means we need to think about how to reach out to this group of potential users and stakeholders, and how to help them understand what we're proposing. That's something that we will look into as well.
Because let's say by the time we issue the standard or shortly thereafter, if we have the guidance material, a potential question somebody might ask us is, if you had this guidance material already, why didn't you put it in the code? I'm just sort of forward thinking the implications of the timing.
It's a very significant strategic point that Workstream 2 and Workstream 1, I assume, will also look at. So we'll probably come back to the board. Certainly, before this, by December, we'll have some ideas how we're going to do this, and get the board's feedback, I would say.
I think if we progress on this way, I'd like to support Sadhya's comment of maybe putting a hook in and sort of saying a general comment, so that the reporting people, even if they're not accountants, think about the things.
Thanks. Just very quickly, Sadia, to your first point, whether we have thought about a new subsection on sustainability reporting. We certainly haven't concluded we'll do that, otherwise we'll say it, but the work stream will have a look at that and look at a number of other factors, how we can, but we're recognizing that it's a brand new area, it's very different, and there may be a need for something like this.
Thank you, Shana and Jeff. Just again, in reaction to your point and Mark's point of the CFO and the existence of corporate governance codes and etc., that is all true. They are much more difficult to enforce because these are the regulations are split among different instruments and tools. But I'd like just to raise your attention at this point, not to lose the topic, that for what Luigi yesterday told me, that there is a specific regulation or law in Italy for the management or managers charged with preparing the financial information, which is something that I think it's not very usual. I was not aware. And I would encourage you, I mean, I did not have time to look at it, Luigi, thank you for sharing, but I would encourage you and Workstream to look at this law, because it seems very interesting and an example or something, a benchmark that we should look at, because it's the way of making sure that we have a single regulation setting up the ethics and behavioral and professional standards or rules for those preparing the information. Very interesting. Okay, Paul.
Thank you so much, Chair. I think I already expressed my anxiety with this in earlier sessions, but I do think what Sadia has said really resonates in terms of how we roll out, how we move forward. It's very important for us as the ethics board to not create an impression that ethics can apply to some and not to others, and put in appropriate language around that. And even just the simple realities of working in groups that do integrated reporting, you do realize just how much the non-CFOs have to get involved to make sure that's really value adding. So we need to be very careful in how we move forward. And even in terms of the optics of this announcement, just being very careful, even when we look at the work we did on outreach and roundtables, whether it would suggest we're engaging much more with those jurisdictions that had high PA involvement in sustainability and not as much in those areas that had non-PA heavy involvement in sustainability, just in terms of how credible we are with the work we're doing. But I think the challenges are very well heard and very well understood. We need to look at how we move forward in those that reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yao Shu.
Thank you, Chair. And I support the workstream's view. And I don't think that the IESBA sets the rules for the non-PAs of the providers of the sustainability reporting. Just like Jinpei said that for the financial statements, we didn't set the code for the non-PAs who prepare the financial statements. So I think it's not the responsibility of the IESBA to set the code, the rules for the non-PAs and who prepare the sustainability reporting. And I think the responsibility is for the regulators, and the regulators should set the rules for them, the non-PAs, and not the IESBA's responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Yao Shu. Yes, that was more or less the conclusion of the conversation that we had in March in Abu Dhabi, and I think that we are all aligned around that idea that we see the problem and we understand that we can't solve the problem. At least we can't solve it alone. But it is, I think, as an ethics board, our responsibility at least to shed some light, to bring the problem into the light and put it on the table for discussion and to be addressed by the regulators, corporate governance community, whoever should be involved in this discussion. But thank you for your comment, Yao Shu. Rich, please.
Actually, Gabrielle, I think what you just said was a large part of it. We all recognize that preparers of any information, financial statement information or sustainability, we absolutely want them to follow appropriate ethical standards. If we're going to take on extending the ethical standards to preparers of sustainability information who are not PAs, we should make it clear that we're also extending the applicability of the code to non-PAs who prepare financial statement information at the same time. Because currently we don't really say that in the code. And I liked how you just described, it's about the message we're sending that ethics is important, regardless of whether you're a PA or not a PA. And it would apply equally whether you're preparing financial statement information or sustainability information. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Jens, please.
I would like to make the same point, Rich, as you has made, because we have made the experience in the financial preparer world that people left the profession by intent after some ethical issues occurred, as you know. And that's why I think my idea, I fully support the approach of the work stream, but there is a need of a statement, a policy statement or something like this in connectivity with the exposure draft, perhaps, to give a statement to say we are encouraging regulators, legislators, whoever is responsible to apply or to make all preparers applying this part 2 or wherever it is, and we will consider how to do this in our future work, but make this statement in concert with the publication of our exposure draft. Thank you.
Thank you very much for raising that, Jens. And I think this is an additional, very critical aspect of this discussion that we should not forget. And that's what you mentioned. It's true in many cases. And this is one of the consequences of focusing the standards and the regulations on the profession, be it whatever profession it is, and not on the service, because it allows people to move into the unregulated or subject to any standard space to do exactly the same thing, but without being subject to a stricter and more stringent set of rules, regulations, standards, whatever. And this is completely inconsistent with the objective, and is not in the public interest. So I think that inevitably this must be moving into the service approach and not profession or groups approach. Thank you for raising that. Luigi, do you still want to speak? So Begonia, please.
Thank you. Well, I guess I already mentioned the other day, but from the PIOV perspective, we understand that the decision that is going to be made, which appears to be like a hybrid code in which there is some section, which is part 5, that refers to assurance, that covers, was applicable for non-PAs and PAs, while the rest is for PAs only. Well, from a pragmatic point of view, it makes sense, but as some members have mentioned, it sounds a bit strange that the ethical part, the code of ethics, is only applied to one group partly. So, I mean, that non-PAs cannot use the full code. Well, it has not been prepared thinking in them, but if they could, if they wanted, they should be able to apply it. But for that, the language is very important. So I understand that at the moment, the only big changes in part 5, and part 5, we still think that some additional change in the language should be made to make it more applicable for the non-PAs. So I should have mentioned that before, but I say it now. So please introduce some additional changes. The NOCLAR is a clear case in which you identified problems for the non-PAs, but there are other more simple terminology terms that could be, well, made more simple, more applicable for them. And well, that's my only comment, but for me, it sounds a bit strange that we have this, you are going to have this hybrid code, which is partly for all, partly, but only partly. Well, thank you.
May I remind you that this part 5 is embarking all our ethic principles and rules that should be applied in this service rendering. So the only hybrid element is that we are not addressing reporting in that part 5, except that we are making an introduction on a general principle that the ethical principle should be applied whatever services in the sustainability assurance provider is doing, okay, as a general principle, as we said yesterday. I do take your point on simplification or putting attention on the vocabulary and wording and etc. in the drafting. We have to navigate between this objective of being understandable and the objective also to have only one truth. So it's a navigation. But we hear the point. Thank you.
Quite a difficult part.
Sorry, Begonia. Okay, Laura.
Thank you. Can I add just something that Christelle said? I wouldn't see it as a hybrid code. I think we're expanding the code to cover a new kind of service, and that kind of service or the standards for that new service can be applied by whomever provides that service. But this code is still not for everything that anyone can do. So I think we're including this new service, and that service is open to everyone, but the rest is still very much focused on PA. So I wouldn't say it's a hybrid code yet, but
yeah, I think that the hybrid term was used in the sense that we have a hybrid approach, profession agnostic for sustainability assurance and non-professional agnostic, if I understood you well. And that's a fact. I mean, that's a fact. We will not, if this is the decision that is going to be taken, this is a hybrid approach for the reasons that have been presented by Workstream 2, and to which the board more or less seems to accept and say, well, or agree, of course, at the moment where we are and with the capacity that we have. I don't want to wrap up before the end of the discussion, but I think that it's clear what's happening here, and what's happening here is more or less around the table with the members say, okay, we understand that it has to be like that now because we don't have the conditions to do other thing, to do more, because we need much more outreach, we need much more understanding, we need much more involvement of other communities, etc. But as a matter of principle and approach, we would like this to go a little bit farther than what we are doing. I think this is the result of this discussion, but I haven't heard to Ken. So Ken, do you still want to speak? Because
yeah, this is a very strategic discussion, as I think the board recognizes. I think I would agree with pretty much everything that's been said around the table. Just some observations, as I guess, from my perspectives in relation to 3 items. One, the idea of non-authoritative material that would highlight the relevance and usefulness of the code to the non-PA community on the reporting side. I would just put in a word of caution there, that the board doesn't rush to commit to developing non-authoritative material until it has developed a strategic plan as to really how to tackle this issue of what ethics standards it might be able to provide to the community of preparers outside the accounting profession, number one, and number two, importantly, the degree of buy-in and acceptance from that part of the community of preparers. And therein, this issue connects with pretty much what we heard in the discussion today about the importance of really reaching out to stakeholders across the spectrum, the regulators, the different professions, the corporate governance community, importantly, with a view to identifying what would be the most practical and the most effective routes to achieve basically the take-up of the standards, recognizing that as we look around the world, there aren't laws and regulations pretty much that govern the reporting side, if you will, or at least on the ethics side, the behavioral aspects of the reporting. So I would think that it's important for us to take stock of where we are, first of all, on our project to develop ethics standards for PAs, because that is a priority focus. Let us make sure that we do this in a way that achieves the objectives of the project first and foremost, and that importantly we marshal the resources in a way that's focused, because otherwise we run the risk of really spreading ourselves thin, and importantly developing something that perhaps isn't going to be achieving what we intend to achieve. And secondly, and that connects also to the first point, it's this discussion really has to go beyond the boundaries of this room, because the risk is, you know, we discussed the issue of ethics standards for preparers outside the accounting profession in an echo chamber, and you know we can all agree with everything that we said, but we have to really get those messages outside of this room, because that's really where there's going to be the impact. So how do we get there? Who do we talk to? Under what time frames, and what sort of approaches, etc. This is a whole different type of conversation that needs to happen. We cannot just send people out there. I mean, we have to have a strategy. So I think it's that sort of echo chamber caution. I would say let's make sure that we have a strategic discussion at the board, and maybe it's a brainstorming session at the board. You know, what's maybe when the exposure draft is out, you know, let's kind of regroup and let's figure out what's the best way to start to think about tackling this issue. And thirdly, it's really about the time frame again. I mean, we are operating at a very tight constraints on the timing. And again, what's the best use of our resources? Do we want to really make sure that we get the project done first and do it diligently to high quality? Or do we get ourselves distracted and start to think about other things that perhaps might be useful, but maybe not? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Mark.
Thank you. That was helpful, Ken, because I absolutely agree with you about the importance of the quality of the project that we take forward and actually doing something that is realistic and deliverable. And I was thinking about Gabriella's comment about, you know, we're developing profession agnostic assurance standards. Is there a risk of a criticism if we're not developing profession agnostic standards for preparers? And I was actually thinking that's sort of not so much an issue now, because if you think about it, financial information for a company is prepared for inclusion in an annual report. Much of that information is prepared by professional accountants, but there are in many companies preparers who are not accountants. And I think one of the points that was made in our discussions on workstream 1 is that anyone can call themselves an accountant, not a professional accountant or a certified accountant or a chartered accountant. So the code has no locus over preparers of financial information who are not professional accountants, members of an IFAC member organization. So actually, we are in a situation which is very comparable with the preparation of financial information. What IESBA is doing is trying to develop a solution that in due course can be offered to a more diverse group of professions to ensure the application of high standards of ethical behavior in the preparation of information. But for sustainability information, it is no different to how it is for financial information. And indeed, you know, I am aware of examples where you go and look at very large listed companies and the CFO is not a professional accountant, yet they are overseeing the entire production of all of the financial information that is publicly available and used. So I think it's important that we're very clear about what we're offering, but from a pragmatic consideration, we are being utterly consistent, because we do face a situation at the moment where not all preparers of financial information are professional accountants, and not all preparers of financial information are obliged to follow the requirements of our code.
Yeah, that's the problem that we have been discussing since March. And yeah, it's, as you say, Mark, it's not different. We are discussing sustainability information, but this is a reality which is exactly the same with respect to financial information. Well, there are some statistics. For instance, in Europe, I think that accountants in Europe has statistics that say that only, I think, 20% of the people involved in these activities are accountants within the companies. The others are not accountants. If we translate this reality for sustainability information, I fear, or well, I suspect that the numbers will go even down. So this is the reality. These are the facts, and what we can do and we should do with these facts. I think it's clear that we should not ignore them. We should not pretend that this doesn't exist. And if we have the conviction, and we have good material, and we will have very good material for preparers of sustainability information who are accountants, why not do what we have to do and what we can do to try to expand it to the others who are sitting in the same room under the same authority, etc. And again, the role of the CFO in financial information is critical. We don't know who is going to play this role with respect to sustainability information. It can be the CFO, it can be the chief sustainability officer that some companies are establishing. It can be many people, some of them, I suspect not many accountants, the others not accountants and not subject to the same framework. So this is the question, this is the problem, and this is what we will have to keep on debating. Let me just follow up on what Ken was saying about we must have a strategic discussion about how to follow up on this topic, where whom are the entities or the people with whom we should speak, how, etc. But the discussion and the dialogue has already taken off. I know that there were some specific moments where this discussion was subject to some public discussions. I will not mention them, but I know that, for instance, that IFAC is already attentive to this and is speaking with OECD, just like we did already before, trying to get OECD to reflect on this and maybe make something with the principles, the corporate governance principles that help in this respect. I know that IFAC approached OECD as well in the same direction, that the firms are very attentive to this topic, Accountancy Europe as well. So the discussion has taken off. And I think that we had some merit there, because this is really something that these organizations are picking up from what the IESBA is discussing publicly and saying public in this respect. Ken, please.
And just to add, just for the board's information, the Financial Stability Board also has picked up on this issue. So in its upcoming progress report on the development of global sustainability related standards for assurance, it will be recognizing in its report, which is going to be issued very imminently, this strategic question that IESBA will be considering. In other words, the development of profession agnostic standards for reporting, for sustainability reporting. So that's already an important sort of milestone, I would say.
Extremely important. The Financial Stability Board is only one of the most important, if not the most important, policymaker in these areas. So if the Financial Stability Board has picked it up, I think that our efforts are paying and that it's going to make the way. By the way, I think that we will have very good news from the Financial Stability Board very soon, but I'll keep it. I'll not tell more for now, because until the last moment, I think we have to wait. Just be attentive to our LinkedIn and website next week. Rania, you still want to say something?
I just wanted to share my humble opinion or view of the matter. So the way I see it, our board's mandate is to issue ethics and independent standards for accountants, because historically, reporting that has to do with organizations, business or non-business, has been financial. I think, I mean, obviously this is changing, the nature of reporting is changing. So I think in the long run, ultimately, our role should be to issue ethics and independent standards for all sorts of preparers of reporting that has to do with organizations, business or otherwise. But I think that we have to command that role rather than demand it. I think that is going to be, so I definitely support the work stream's approach, because I think that, I mean, we're sticking to our remit because that's our remit. I think ultimately the direction of travel will be determined by the reaction of the broader community and stakeholders to our sustainability assurance standards. I mean, once we have established that we are in a position to develop such standards for everyone involved in that process, I think that automatically we will be asked to play that role, and gradually our role is going to evolve. So that's what I want. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I'd like also to raise your attention for the fact that the sustainability reporting standards are progressing at a good pace. ISSB, EFRAG, etc. So they are there. look at the ethical side of it. I will not say that it doesn't exist, but it's extremely fragile, superficial, and etc. So I see space for us to play some role there. Of course, with respect to ISSP, we have been saying that for a long time. But even if we think about EFRAG standards, the European standards in this respect, they have something, namely on fees, and as we have seen yesterday, but the rest is very, it doesn't exist almost. So there is space for us in this respect as well, not only in assurance. Okay, I think that we will break. Sorry, yeah. We will break now a little bit late. Let's break for 20 minutes. So we will come back at 11:10 or 10 past 11. Thank you very much. So welcome back. Thank you for being back on time. We now have Andy Minter that I can see on the screen. Hello, Andy. Thank you for joining us again. Is it the same taxi?
No. Can
Where
you hear
are
me?
you?
I have a different
Very
setup
well.
than normal. Yeah, no, I'm in London on the way to Heathrow, so I will be joining you this way until I'm there tomorrow in person.
Okay, safe travels, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So thank you to the board for the very substantive and substantial conversation and discussion before the break. I think that this is inspiring, and this is leaving us a reason, giving us a reason to exist for the next few years at least as a board. And Christelle, I'd like now to give you the floor back to keep on presenting on the workstream 2 proposals.
So as we're running a little bit out of time compared to our initial thought, we were going to share with the board some drafting parts of part 2. But we have already received some comments on this, and I would ask if the board can send us the comments they have on our preparation documents that they were sent to the board, so that we can now go to the terms and definition and try to reach the end of our subjects to be shared with the board. So we have 3 key terms and definition for consideration of the board. Next slide, please. Sustainability information, not a new beast. Sustainability assurance practitioner versus provider, and professional activity. Relating to sustainability information, we have already gone through extensive talks with the CAG. We had your feedback already. We have concluded there was a need for definition, but we're going to share that again. Also, we have to consider the draft IESBA 5000, and we considered also other global standards for that. And so this is what we share. The CAG feedback in March, we presented an initial draft of the definition, which was generally supportive of our approach and of the initial draft, with a few wording suggestions. Okay. The board feedback, also in March, some members expressed mixed views on whether a definition of sustainability information was required, but then the board remained open about the need for a definition term in the code. And so, in assessing the need for a defined definition, or a defined term, sorry, we considered that this expression is used in the draft new part 5 and revisions to part 2 of the code. So having a term, but not defining it, could possibly lead to arbitrary, misleading, or too narrow interpretations of the IESBA standards, and therefore weaken them. Having a definition serves a clarifying and pedagogic purpose, and contributes to the clarity, implementability, and enforceability of IESBA standards as required by the public interest framework. So workstream 2 considered using other terms instead of sustainability information, such as sustainability matters, sustainability data, sustainability factors. but eventually agreed to retain the term sustainability information because it seems the most adequate under the PIF characteristics. The term to be used should act as the equivalent of historical financial information with respect to sustainability, of course. In terms of reporting, Section 220 of the Code deals with the preparation and presentation of information using the term information throughout the standards. If a different word is used for sustainability purposes, then the revision in Part 2 of the Code, notably the Section 220, would potentially require the use of lengthy and repetitive expressions, information for financial reporting, and another term for sustainability reporting, possibly affecting the standard overall consistency, clarity, and conciseness, and consequently their implementability and enforceability. So finally, sustainability information also seems to be the term that best defines the appropriate scope of the IESBA standards, as those standards need to be adequately cover both reporting and assurance activities. When working on a revised definition, we considered the terms and definition used by other global standard setters. This slide with the terms and definition used by IESSB, EFRAG has already been presented to the board in March. In addition, we have also considered the terms and definition used by GRI, ISO, accountability, and the United Nations. As you can see on this slide, this definition did not define sustainability information, even though the UN and GRI have defined other terms. So I give the floor to Laura for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Christelle. So another thing that we considered when revising our draft definition of sustainability information is the need for coordination with the IEESB, and notably the draft standard ISA 5000. And if you remember, the situation back in March is that the workstream 2 considered the proposed definition that the ISA 5000 had was deemed too technical and too process oriented for the purposes of the ethics standards. And so the first draft that the workstream 2 presented to the board, it meant to be an overarching definition that could be understandable by stakeholders that are not assurance practitioners from the accountancy profession. And so back in March, we had quite a big gap between the two boards or the two task forces approaches regarding the same term, sustainability information. Since then, we have had several coordination and liaison meetings, and this definition has been a recurring item, and some bridging options have been explored. And so the IEESB Sustainability Task Force will now present in June next week the proposal to add a new term, which is sustainability matters. This means that there will be two terms in draft ISA 5000, sustainability information and sustainability matters. The first one would retain that more technical approach, but it will also say that it's information about sustainability matters. And this is where we have the bridge between the two boards approach, because sustainability matters is being proposed to be defined in a very broad way, and in a way that is understandable by all stakeholders. Thank you. So as you can see on the screen, we have the two draft definitions that are included in the papers that have been proposed, that have been disclosed in preparation ahead of the IEESB board meeting next week. as you can see, the first one, sustainability information, it starts saying that it's information about sustainability matters. And then that more technical approach for the purposes of this IESBA sustainability information results from measuring or evaluating sustainability matters against applicable criteria. When sustainability information sends us to the definition of sustainability matters and we see how it's drafted, it mentions the ESG factors, environmental, social, economic, and cultural factors, which was also present in the first draft of Workstream 2. We can also see in the first, small I, the reference to the impacts of sustainability on the entity and the impacts of the entity on sustainability factors. So we can see that both definitions, both proposed definitions are heading in the same direction. And ideally, we will have the same definition, but there's a big reason why there are still some differences in terms of language. It's because also in terms of timeline, we have different timelines, as you know. So the IESBA is planning to approve its exposure draft now in June, and they need a definition to go into their exposure draft. So in any case, we recognize that this topic will require ongoing coordination between the two boards, again, especially because of these different timelines. And so going on to the revised draft, as Christelle mentioned earlier, and we could see on the earlier slides, the feedback that we had in March, both from the CAG and the IESBA meetings, allowed Workstream 2 to elaborate on its initial draft. And we will go into more detail explaining this proposal, but you can see that this revised draft has a first paragraph that is a definition and a second paragraph that is a description and which provides some more guidance. So the objective is to have sustainability information to play an equivalent role to the definition of historic financial information, because both these terms refer to the basic elements that a company collects and treats and then reports. And so to strengthen the parallel between the two definitions, sustainability information and historic financial information, this first paragraph is structured in a way that is similar to the definition of historical financial information. And then we have a second paragraph that supports a description that supports a definition that is more of a description and provides additional guidance. And it intends to illustrate the various components of what may be considered sustainability information without trying to be exhaustive. So this is an illustration, not supposed to include everything. So as you can see on the description, the first paragraph, it mentions the characteristics of the sustainability information. It says that it can be expressed in financial or non-financial terms. And this allows for both single and double materiality perspectives. And it also recognizes the possibility of integrated reporting. This information can be historical or forward-looking. It mentions ESG, the ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance, but it goes beyond ESG, as you can see. We added a broad reference to economic impacts at the beginning. And at the end, we also included the reference to other impacts. This makes the definition purposely, it was intended to make this definition very broad, to ensure that it ages well, that it's future-proof, and it can stand the test of time. We also expanded the notions of impacts on the entity, by the entity. And again, this also makes the definition very, very broad, very wide, and broad enough to work regardless of whether the reporting framework uses the single or the double materiality perspective. And if we look at the second paragraph, the description, it goes into a little more detail. It makes clear that regardless of how local laws or other frameworks define sustainability information, it will fall into IESBA's definition, and therefore IESBA standards will apply. This, of course, also applies to the IAASB's definition. So we made sure to specify the reporting or the assurance framework to make that connection very clear. The second bullet clarifies that no matter the purpose of the disclosure, whether it's for internal or external purposes, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, it will always be considered sustainability information for the purposes of applying ISO standards. The third bullet recognizes the specificities of sustainability information, and then it can be derived from the entity itself or from third parties that are in the value chain. The recognition of the challenges posed by the value chain, upwards and downwards, this was a recurring message that we heard both in the roundtables, but also from the CAG representatives. And the last bullet mentions the measurement of performance, which is also a comment that we heard during the CAG meeting. And there's one element that I would like to mention that we used in the initial draft that we presented in March, but we didn't retain in this revised draft. It's the reference to the company's policies, performance plans, and goals. We understood that it's comprised in the notion of governance, so we didn't feel the need to repeat it here. In terms of feedback from the NSS, it was overall positive. One participant noted that ESG is a very politicized term and thus agreed on expanding it, and also mentioned that apart from the economic aspects, which we have there, also cultural aspects could be mentioned in the definition. And the workstream to consider this possibility of adding also a reference to cultural aspects, which the IAASB actually does. But workstream to consider that's a factor that's included in the social factor. So again, no need to go into this detail. And before I pause for comments, I would like to ask if Christelle has something to add.
No, I think we tried to find a way to be focused enough, but future-proof, so broad enough for future inclusion of new concepts. We are open to your observations and recommendations to try to finalize this key definition.
Thank you, Laura and Christelle. I think that this builds very much upon what we had discussed last March in Abu Dhabi. So there is I don't see any significant change of direction, although it's much more substantiated and you added content and explanations, which I think are extremely useful. By the way, I would from now recommend that this explanation is by any means included in the exposure draft, so that people can understand what is the reason for the definition. Secondly, thank you for the efforts that are being made by the work stream, but also by other board members and staff involved in the coordination with IAASB to try to come up with a solution which is at the same time acceptable from the point of view of the IESBA with respect to what sustainability information definition should be and involve, but at the same time ensure some kind of bridging, like Laura called it. So comments, Hector, please.
Thank you very much. I like the definition. I have only two comments. One, something that Laura mentioned regarding policies, commitments, and internal definitions by the company. I see that maybe you don't want to list them separately, but can we make sure that they fit somewhere within the reporting framework? When we make reference to the reporting framework, that they could include things that the company says that is doing, that is going to report on, if they have a net zero commitment. Is that part of the reporting framework that we're going to use? That could be helpful in terms of it's not only the GRI in abstract, it's also what the company has said, the commitments with the communities and stakeholders. I don't know if that could fit there, but it would be a solution not to lose that part, which is actually really important from a public interest point of view, because we want companies to make those commitments and to move forward. So we need to make sure that they are accountable on what they say. And the second comment is, and maybe this is my misunderstanding, but the last bullet is measurement of an entity's performance over the short, medium, and long term. This is forward-looking, because in that case, it's not really measurement. It's more like forecast or a scenario analysis than a measurement. At least in my opinion, and maybe I'm getting it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Christelle?
Okay. We will see if there is a better positioning of policies, commitments, etc., or if we should put them back into the description part. We will discuss this in our work stream. On the question of measurement, I understand what you. When we discussed it, it was not about only the fact that you need in sustainability to have scenarios, etc. But you also have very important issues in the way you measure things before putting them together in a scenario. But I understand what you say, and we're going to embark that and see what's the right way to embark those two notions.
Okay, Christelle, thank you. Mark, please.
Thank you, and I'd very much welcome all of the work of the work stream on this. A couple of questions really just to test whether my own understanding of whether or not this is consistent across the board. So in respect of your definition, particularly of sustainability information, when you talk about law, regulation, or the applicable reporting or assurance framework, the applicable reporting or assurance framework assumes that a jurisdiction has adopted a framework. Does this also apply where a jurisdiction hasn't adopted one, and therefore it's within the choice of the reporting entity? So there may be no applicable framework. It may be that they've chosen one, and do we catch that? And then sort of my other question related to the measurement of the entity's performance. I did wonder, perhaps in the same vein as Hector, whether it should also say performance and prospects, because in a sense, the sustainability forward-looking information is about prospects. And I also had a question about whether or not, given you have referenced dual materiality, as well as performance and prospects, did you also need to say impact? I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but it's just, we need to make sure we're consistent throughout. Thank you.
So the impact was well positioned in the definition. So we tried not to repeat things in the description, but I understand what you say about that. On the fact that we start the description by prescription of law and regulations, but if you're not in prescription by law and regulation, you fall into the second one. I would expect you prepare things only for yourself, internal purposes of for following your operations, etc., or preparing yourself for future commitments, or you do it for mandatory or voluntary disclosure. So we felt this was complementary, these two, I think, and covered your matter.
Okay, thank you. Felicia.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I like the definition. It's much better than what we had in Abu Dhabi previously. It captures, I think, majority of what we need to see in the sustainability information. I just had a question, maybe, or need for clarification. In the definition, when you talk about economic, environmental, social governance, and other sustainability impacts, do we need to indicate that sustainability? So is there a need to repeat the word sustainability, at least if you can say other impacts? Because if you follow again the next line, then you say impacts may be on the entity or the environment, the public or the economy. So I was just wondering whether that sustainability should also be there, but that's just for clarity purposes. Thank you.
We felt that at least there should be once in the definition the word sustainability. So it's just you know, if you put it from the code point of view, sustainability information, you have the definition just in front. If by any chance the definition is going out without the word, without the code perspective, etc., it was better to have the word sustainability, but it's
yeah. I think that we need it, Felicia. I understand your point, trying not to repeat the word, but if we take it out of, it's going to be other impacts, can be anything from any nature and source and etc. And it's not exactly that we are targeting. So even if I understand your discomfort with using the word in the definition, what's being defined in the definition, I think that we have to limit the circle of impacts that we are speaking about. If you understand what I mean, Jeff.
Thanks, Gabrielle. I was just going to actually just say that was exactly the rationale of Workstream 2 when they try to mention a few sustainability, I guess, aspects, but recognizing it needs to be broad enough. Hence, we say other sustainability impact. We're not trying to explain it too much more. So exactly the point that Gabrielle was just trying to bring out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy.
Thank you. And I hadn't raised this before because I'm still going back and forth in my mind as to where this deals from an ethical construct as opposed to a financial, from a preparation construct or an assurance construct. But I just thought I'll just share it with the task force, with the board. It starts off information expressed in financial and non-financial terms. I believe we're talking about information expressed by the entity, and that links up with the third bullet point of obtained from an entity or its value chain, and putting it in a historical financial statement. Sometimes entities get information created by the entity or created by, say, a bank or other organization that's then used to create the information expressed by the company. So I wasn't sure if it's necessarily obtained by an entity or created by the entity or its value chain or originated or something. But anyways, just that orientation that I just been going back and forth in my mind, just wanted to share that we're probably dealing with information expressed by the company as opposed to providing assurance or commenting on information that's out there that's not provided by the company. But just put a marker down for that. So thank you for letting me mention that.
Thank you, Andy. Rania, please.
Yes, so I really like the definition. I think it's very comprehensive. Two suggestions. One, I mean, the explanation, the 4 bullets perhaps you may want to consider combining the first two bullets, because it seems to me that, like, I mean, to address some of the comments that were made around the table, it seems to me that all four bullets should apply, which sort of takes out the possibility that it does not apply to a certain framework, as Mark was saying. So if you want to take or scope in information that is voluntarily disclosed, so you could like combine the two bullets such that, I mean, it reads as like assurance framework and or prepared for internal purposes for mandatory or voluntary disclosure. Just a suggestion, because the way it stands right now, it seems as though it has to be defined by law, regulation, and applicable or reporting framework. So if you just combine them, it shows that it's either or, it doesn't have to be there. And finally, the last bullet, does it, I mean, perhaps we should also consider including in there past information, because sometimes, I mean, short, medium, or long term seems to be more prospective. So, I mean, sometimes, I mean, sustainability information could also relate to past performance. Thank you.
We will have a look at that. On your proposition to combine, this is not a closed definition of what is included. It says this information includes different situations. So it is illustrative, not closed. Maybe there are some other situations where it would be well on purpose to capture into sustainability information. So this is for the future proof. So combining the two first bullet, I feel a little bit not at ease with that, because I think the longer the word, the less you think about all of them. and it was really to put that first. If there is a requirement, whatever the requirement, this is a sustainability information if it's in this world, then if you want to go for it for your own purpose, for a mandatory, which is not a regulation, maybe between actors of the same business sector or whatever, they have or be it voluntary, it is also a sustainability information for our purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Rani and Christelle. China, please.
I just have one point of including assurance. Generally, law, regulation, or the applicable reporting framework will define the criteria, and then you assure against that criteria. Can you just remind me why we need assurance in there?
It's to make clear that the IESBA definition is comprised in our definition, because we are describing it in different ways. So this is also a way to make it broader and more comprehensive. So regardless if it's law, regulation, whatever kind of framework, reporting, assurance, or whatever, it's however they define it, it's included in our definition.
But like, let's say somebody assures against the IESBA standards, that's the reporting criteria.
That's included. So, but because that's a reporting framework, however they define sustainability information, it will mean also sustainability information for the purposes of our standards.
Okay.
So the ethics standards can be applicable if the entity follows whichever reporting framework or assurance framework.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. It's just that normally you will have a reporting framework and criteria against which you will assure. So I'm sort of thinking it doesn't hurt, but is it really necessary?
I think given the way the both boards are defining it, I think it's better safe than sorry.
Okay, thank you, Laura and China. Junpei, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Laura, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm supportive of work streams direction. The proposed definitions are very comprehensive. My understanding is that currently there are lots of assurance engagement which non-assurance non-PAs provide in accordance with the assurance standards developed by ISO, accountability, and other organizations. I think definitions proposed by work streams are reasonable as they reflect on their standards. In order to develop professional agnostic standards, it is important to communicate with standard setters, including IESBA and other organizations closely and continuously. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Junpei. Christelle, do you want
no,
to respond?
well,
Okay.
point taken.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Begoña, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Well, as a general thing, we in PIOBs consider that it would be good that the definitions of sustainability information be the same, as consistent or even the same by the IESBA and the IEESB, but that's something else. And reading carefully this slide, I have doubts about several words here. First, about the economic, because saying that economic, environmental, social governance, or other sustainability impacts, we are saying that economic is sustainability. I think I understood it, and they're saying that way, and I'm not so sure. Something else is that sustainability things have impact in the economics of the company and in the world, but that economic is sustainability to me is not clear. That's something that is strange. Then, if I am reading it properly, it says about impacts of an entity on the entity or on the environment. So is it what you want to say? The impact of the entity on the entity? And what about the impacts of the environment on the entity? Is that covered as well?
Yeah, so it's in the first part. The impacts may be on the entity. So it's external impact on the entity.
But in the prior sentence, you talk about the impact of an entity only. And my point is that if I stop, I'm thinking about the impacts of the entity that could take place on the same entity or in the environment. But what about the environment on the entity? So that's my question. I don't know if it is covered or not. And then thinking about the measurement, I guess that in this field, there are also some aspects that will be captured that will not be in monetary units. So is that included here or not? So just to take that into account. Thank you.
So thank you. Starting with the first comment, whether economic, the reference to economic is its sustainability. The intention here was to use a word broad enough to cover any sustainability related factors that may arise in the future. And for instance, if I remember, we were discussing back in March, what about tax planning or tax related impacts? I think those may not be covered or sufficiently covered in the traditional ESG concept, but I think they might be sufficiently covered with the reference to economic. So some things that go beyond the specific or the narrowest interpretation of ESG, but that may also be considered as having sustainability related impacts. We felt that economic was a word broad enough to cover them and again to make this definition future proof and applicable for whatever may arise in the future. relating to the second comment, the impacts. So I think, not I think, I know the intention is or was to include the impacts on the entity, so from the environment, social, etc., on the entity, and of the entity on the environment, public, or economy. I realize this may have not been drafted in the best way, so we will work on that, but that is the purpose. Regarding the measurement, whether this is only quantitative or also qualitative, I think measurements, we can think about that, the use of that word, but I think measurement can also be used in a qualitative way. So it can be a narrative measurement, not necessarily
meaning not qualitative, I mean quantitative, but not in monetary units.
Yes.
So it's not qualitative, it's quantitative, but not in monetary units. That's my only comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, Begonia, the idea there, and Laura said it, it probably not drafted in the best way, but the idea is really, as we are taking a framework neutral approach, we want to cover both single materiality and double materiality, depending on the underlying framework or the framework that is being used for the purpose of the sustainability reporting. So that was the intention, very much discussed and debated in Abu Dhabi and afterwards. But it's really a journey to come up with the right drafting to make sure that everybody understands what is written there. Thank you. Vania, please.
Thank you. I would just like to add to Laura's response to Begonia. When we think in sustainability, we in general associate it to environmental, social, and governance aspects. But the real concept of sustainability involves the financial aspect as well. A company will just be sustainable if it is able to provide financial results and able to do so without destroying the environment and disregarding social and human rights, and to do so without recovering to any conflict in the governance aspect. So we wanted the reference to be associated with the concept that integrated reporting that we have. So sustainability does not disregard the financial. Instead of using financial again, as it is in the beginning of the sentence, we elected to use the terminology of economic, but that is the main reason. So, okay.
Thank you, Vania, for this additional clarity. So, Ken, the last one as usual.
And that is entirely fine, Gabriela. So just a few comments and reactions, I suppose, in the light of the discussion I've just had. Maybe I'll start with the last bullet. And that's just on the point of measurement. And maybe my first comment maybe goes to Hector's question earlier. Are we really referring to measurement of a sort of a forecasted position or an anticipated outcome? I didn't read it that way because the bullet says it's information that relates to the measurement of an entity's performance. So the measurement is going to be done at a point in time, and it may be a measurement that's designed to really just address short-term outcomes, or it could be a measurement that's designed for medium-term outcomes or even long-term outcomes. So the measurement is going to be done at a point in time, and therefore it may well be looking back to the historical outcomes of the entity's activities. So I was okay with this, but maybe to go big on Begonia's question, whether it's always about quantitative measurements, I think a simple fix could be to simply add the word evaluation, because yes, performance will get evaluated in both quantitative or qualitative term. So I would just suggest adding measurement or evaluation of entities' performance over the short, medium, or long term. So moving up then to the third bullet point, I would suggest consideration of perhaps defining the concept of a value chain, because for those who are close to the discussions or close to the ESG field, they may well understand what we mean by value chain, but not necessarily everybody. So maybe describing or explaining what it means, or potentially even defining it, might be useful. And my maybe perhaps two more substantive comments are first of all, in relation to the first bullet point, I'm just wondering whether it's actually positioned in the right place, because it is actually attached to the definition, and it is, I mean, might there be a potential for confusion? Because on the one hand, we are defining sustainability information in the code, and then we're also saying it is potentially defining all regulation or applicable reporting framework, etc. And what is interaction between those two references? In other words, one is we have a definition in the code, and the other one we have a definition or regulation, etc. Are we saying that if law or regulation are not as comprehensive as the definition in the code then comes in and supplement basically is a more comprehensive definition? What if there is a conflict between what we say in the definition in the code and the definition or regulation? Which one supersedes or takes precedence? So I'm just wondering whether it's, as I say, I don't have an answer, but maybe think about it. Should it be more that we define it in terms of, first of all, it's whatever is defined by law or regulation, or if there isn't a definition or regulation or the applicable reporting framework, then this is a definition in the code. So it's a bit of a structural thing. And my final comment is really the sentence in blue in the definition itself. And I'm just wondering whether it's actually needed, because when we refer to environmental, so information expressed in financial and non-financial terms, whether historical or forward-looking, about the economic, environmental, social governance impacts. So the concept of environmental impact speaks to the impact relative to the environment. So do we need to refer to the impact on the entity or on the environment? Equally, when we refer to the economic impact, well, it's going to be the impact on the public or the economy itself, right? And thirdly, social and governance, where this has to be relative to either the entity itself or the public. So just think about it. I mean, do we actually need it? Because if you were to drop it, this is going to work equally well.
In our previous version, we had a very brief. We had the word impact, but with no sentence to make it clear that it was going both sides. And we had input, I think it was by the CAG and also by the board. Please make sure it is understood that it goes both sides. So this is why we said, okay, it is an information expressed on the impacts of an entity's activities, services, products, but also of the impact of environment, public or economy on the entity. So it goes both sides. And there was a need for something more clearer than in our previous version. We understand that there were a recommendation here to make it clearer in our drafting, and we will do that. But I would recommend not to come back to a version where it is too much implicit.
Well, if I may, I'm sorry, Laura.
Thank you. So yeah, just like Christelle was saying, the sentence in blue is actually the sentence that speaks to the double materiality perspective, because it's the ESG, for ease of reference, related impacts that the company has on the environment and the public, etc. But also the impacts coming from those places on the entity. So again, I think we need to redraft those two, that sentence in blue with the end of the previous sentence to make it clear. But I think that the sentence in blue is really what speaks to the double materiality.
Yeah, and I would suggest maybe the clearer way to do this would be to actually have two separate bullet points. One that will speak to the impact of the entity on the environment, etc., and then the one that speaks to the impact from the other direction. So if you were to put it in two separate bullet points, that would be clearer, because otherwise it seems to be sort of doubling down on the same thing.
And if I can also add something related to your previous comment on that first bullet, whether it's defined in the IESBA code or in law, regulation, or other framework, the intention here is not to. There will not be, or at least in our how we constructed it, there will not be a situation where our definition conflicts with other definitions used in laws and regulations or frameworks. And again, maybe we can work on the drafting of this idea, but what we want to say is we have sustainability information in IESBA standards used in a certain way. And what we want to say is, because the ethics standards do not live by themselves. They will apply when someone is preparing information or when someone is assuring information. And when someone is doing those two activities according to law, regulation, or the applicable reporting or assurance framework, however, that law, regulation, or framework defines sustainability information, it doesn't matter, because it will be the same way, or it will be considered the same way as the IESBA definition. So the ethics standards will be able to apply. It's not going to be a problem of not being able to apply the IESBA standards just because the definitions are not completely aligned.
Sorry, just quickly. Thank you, Gabriela. I do get your point, Ken, about the relationship between the definition that we have, and because we use the words defined there, so it looks like it's another definition. So we'll look at that, and perhaps the way that Laura explains it, but we'll definitely make sure that interaction is clearly listed out there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I know that we still have Hector, but let me just thinking about Ken's suggestion to drop the part of the sentence in blue, and also having clear that we have to leave clear that we want to cover single materiality or double materiality. I know it's very boring to be drafting here, but I was thinking if we could drop it and just tweak a little bit the first sentence and saying governance or other sustainability impacts on the entity or of the entity's activities, services, and on the entity or of the entity, and so have both things, the impact on the entity and of the entity, in the same sentence with just a small tweak in the sentence, and then that would allow us to drop the last part, which I agree that it's creating a little bit of confusion. I think it would be clear that we are covering both. But yeah, just for consideration, you'll see the best way. Hector.
Sorry to take the floor again in the same line of for your review of this section. I would keep in mind the TCFD framework in redrafting or in revising this, in terms that you want to make sure that this is covering assurance of transitional and physical risks and scenarios as well, in terms of the impact of, I don't know, drought on the assets and the ability of the company to continue its activity. So there is impacts on the company, as well as the more typical GRI approach on the impacts of the company on society. And so both need to be here. And for my comment on the last one was that it looks pretty much like the measurement of an entity's performance keeps thinking on the framework of the auditor and the projections of financial aspects. And here we need to bring in scientific and speculative predictions of what climate where we were going to move, if it's 1.5, it's 2, or it's 3 degrees. And I think that part is really important for the assurance of this kind of information.
Okay, thank you very much, Hector. Christelle?
So, well, I can only say thank you for all these good inputs, and we go back to our work. Thank you. So we will now go to the next word we wanted to share with you. We propose to use the term practitioner for the following reason. In sustainability assurance, we have the choice between practitioner, provider, etc. We propose practitioner, which is a professional agnostic term. It is commonly used in other fields to refer to, for instance, medical or legal practitioners. It is therefore not a term specific to accountancy profession. The use of the term sustainability assurance practitioner would promote consistency with IESBA standards. The draft ISA 5000 uses the term practitioner, which scopes in both individuals and firms. The IEESB reference group, composed of non-PAs, did not raise any issues with using the term practitioner. The SRG that we also consulted, as Chana reported back on Monday, suggested to clarify that the practitioner is equivalent to the provider that we find in other standards, such as the CSRD or AA 1000. Regardless of the specific term to be used in the IESBA standards, practitioner or provider, the workstream did not consider the draft definition proposed last March warrants any revision. You have here 2 examples of the use of the term practitioner, just for illustration purpose in our first drafting. So, if the board has some recommendations, we need now to elaborate and go further in our drafting with a clear approbation of the wording to be retained. If there are any comments.
Thank you, Christelle. Comments to this proposal of using the term sustainability assurance practitioner versus other possible alternatives.
No.
Luigi, please.
I'm in agreement with the proposal. Just a suggestion. When we go to the glossary and read the definition of professional accountant, there are certain clarification in italic, which make very clear the role of the firm when we go to the definition. Just to be sure that the definition include and the reader understand that the definition include the firm.
Yeah, that's an important point. Other comments? Can we assume that everybody is in agreement with this term of practitioners? That's good. Okay,
Thank you.
Christelle, back to you.
So now we go to the term of professional activity. Next slide. Yeah. The code applies to all professional activities of professional accountants. Professional activity is defined as an activity requiring accountancy or related skills undertaken by a professional accountant, including accounting, auditing, tax, management, consulting, and financial management. That's our definition. The relevance of this term for sustainability assurance and the possible need to amend its definition is intrinsically linked to the scope of ethics standard as discussed yesterday. In accordance with all our scoping recommendation, a generic reference to activities or services in part 5 would suffice. It is not necessary nor appropriate, given the multiple professions involved, to qualify them as professional. However, to avoid confusion with the existing terms of professional activities and professional services, Workstream 2 proposes to use the term engagement instead. And therefore, we propose that there are no change to the existing terms definition, meaning that professional activity will still exist in the code, but we will use the term engagement, and so there will not be any conflicts of understanding. Now, if we assess if there is a need to change the definition of professional activity for inclusion of sustainability-related activities in part 2, which covers the PAs, as mentioned during our last board in March, the current definition is used by professional accountancy organizations in some jurisdictions, such as Australia, if I remember well, for purpose of certification, qualification, training. Therefore, any revisions require careful consideration. The workstream is of the view that accounting on the extent definitions may be sufficiently broad to include reporting activities such as sustainability. We also note there were no changes to this definition of professional activity as a result of the technology project, even though these activities were not expressly mentioned in the definition. So we propose not to change the definition and keep it as it is, even for the understanding and the applicability to the part 2.
Thank you, Christelle. Reactions? Well, I have one.
Yes.
I have, to be frank, difficulties in considering that accounting includes sustainability reporting. I think that from a technical point of view, it can be like that. I imagine that this may create strong reactions from both sides, by the way, from professional accountants and from non-professional accountants. I think that accounting is a very precise term that speaks about accountancy, and sustainability reporting is not the same thing. So I don't know if it would be problematic to add to accounting something like corporate reporting or something that, or sustainability. We should not have be afraid of using the words, but something more specific or more broad. One of the things that may make people more comfortable about or more, make it more clear that sustainability reporting fits into this definition. I don't know if it's only me who is of this opinion, but I have some, it's.
I would be reluctant just to add corporate reporting because it is already meant to be included when we see about the financial statements, financial and non-financial information, etc. Everything is already meant to be covered with the present definition. So if we would add something, it would be more specific to sustainability, and there we see some risk in the implementation. This was our reasoning. For the moment, this is it is more requiring accountancy and related skills. It is not meant to cover all detailed activities. Yes. So I understand what you say. But in another way, the corporate reporting is already covered by the activities. So where it is.
Okay.
No,
well.
you see, this was our reasoning. I don't say it's proof, but so we feel there is a risk if we change dramatically the definition. It would entail a lot of consequences on and very quickly on like we said, on training, on qualification, certification, etc. And so we had a long discussion about that. You want to add something?
I will. I know other board members might have different views or similar views. One of the thoughts the workstream 2 had was that with this definition, because they talked about requiring accountancy or related skills, hence we thought that is broad enough and therefore not necessary to change this fairly fundamental definition of this term, or the definition of this really important term. But we certainly would, take your comments and other board members as well.
Okay, Jeff, Mark.
I'm afraid I have to disagree, Gabriella, on the grounds that one of the most significant players in looking at sustainability early on was accounting for sustainability, which the King set up when he was Prince of Wales. And indeed, it identified the challenge of accounting as being one of the fundamental issues that had to be understood and addressed in order to make businesses resilient and realize the consequences of what they do on the environment. And they've been doing that for nearly 20 years. So I think there's actually a very strong case that accountability is one of those sort of fundamental skills that is relevant in the sustainability space. And it might be slightly broader than normal sort of financial accounting in the context of putting together a set of financial statements, but accounting for sustainability is a very relevant concept and very relevant even now.
Well, I think that accountability is one thing and accounting is another thing. Well, let's see what is the reaction of others, and I'm probably wrong. It's probably just a very skinny reaction, but anyway, Sadia, please.
I have a clarification question first. I wanted to confirm that the word professional activity and professional services wouldn't be used at all in Part 5. Okay. In the current code, we use those two words over 100 times in the code. So this is going to lead to a lot of consequential amendments. So if a professional accountant is used to one version of the code, there's going to be a lot of times they're going to have to go back and say, in in part 5, this actually means this. And I was wondering if the working group considered the other alternative, that is to actually keep those two words, professional accountant and professional activity and professional services in the definition, and underneath it to include in italics. So for the purposes of part 5, this is what it would mean, or actually highlighting it, saying that for the purpose of part 5, this word has been used in this construct, so that when you're reading the entire code, then you can link those two words together, and it would be a little bit more coherent rather than reading it afresh. That was the one. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sadia. And I don't know if you want.
Very interesting proposition. We will discuss this with the group and say if there are some hidden consequences to take care about. Thank you.
Thank you. Jana, please.
I think this may be 10 years back, Ken. The board ran a project about looking at the definition of professional activity. And after some research and evaluation, came back to the same definition. And I think it's because it says including. So it could include many things, including these activities, but it could include others as well. And then the consequence of changing, I can understand the consequence of changing the definition, because then that could have impact all over the code, as Sadia just mentioned. So maybe my comments are sort of similar to Sadia in whether there's some sort of guidance that could be added, saying that this is a very expansive definition because it says including, and for the purpose of this, it will include sustainability reporting.
Thank you, Chana. Begonia, please.
Thank you. Well, in this definition, the beginning tells about the skills that the professional activity has, and then it describes the different activities that the professional activity or the professional accountant will do. I wonder if in this accounting could be, I understand that this accounting in blue includes the traditional financial reporting. If you add corporate reporting, then you cover financial reporting and sustainability reporting. So why not introducing corporate reporting as something else in addition to accounting, and then covers the preparation of financial statements as well as sustainability statements? It's an idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Begonia. Ken. Oh, sorry, I was not seeing Rania.
I just wanted to say that if we consider that professional activity includes sustainability reporting, which I'm assuming we do, then I have to agree with Gabriela and the others that I think we'd be contradicting ourselves, because I mean, as a code, even if we want to draw the distinction between, part 5, which is addressing sustainability, but in terms of the spirit of the code, I mean, we are making it very clear to draw the distinctions between accounting and other sustainability information. And here we expect whoever is holding the code to assume that accounting includes sustainability information. So I think we'd be contradicting ourselves. I think perhaps to Saadia's point, it makes sense to perhaps use a footnote or something. Corporate reporting, I think I would definitely agree that it covers sustainability reporting from a private sector perspective, but then you'd probably be scoping out the non-corporates. So I think we always have to keep in mind that we want to have everybody in there. So I don't have the answer, but I would suggest reconsidering this point.
Yeah. Ken, please.
Gabriela, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and my first point, I suppose, is that the board should not feel tied to the fact that professional accountancy bodies use that definition for purposes of accrediting, qualifying their members, etc. Because however the board defines this term ought to flow through to those who adopt the code. So rather than the other way around, so to speak. And my second point is, yes, I mean, reading this definition, which hasn't been changed for decades, does convey the impression that the profession hasn't moved since since eons ago, I suppose, but the profession of accountancy has evolved by leaps and bounds. And my suggestion would be, rather than try to solve this now, to reach out to the education department within IFAC to see whether they would have some suggestions as to how best to reflect where the profession is now, because education standards define what accountancy means. And even if you were to tweak the second part of the definition that speaks to the inclusion of the different types of activities, I don't think we would be changing the definition in substance if we were to keep the first part unchanged, because the first part is what is operative. It is referring to an activity requiring accountancy or related skills. If this is still valid, the definition wouldn't be changed. All that we would be doing is actually elaborating a little bit on and illustrating what might be some of these types of activities that accountants do nowadays. So just a couple of suggestions and food for thought maybe, but my suggestion is not to try to draft this by committee and not to try to come up with a final answer today.
Just very quickly, thanks, Ken. Good suggestion. Just for context, the workstream 2 did one of the key things they were conscious about is, like you said, Ken, is the first part of the sentence is activity requiring accountancy or related skills. So we tried not to have to change that, but the second part, after including, there's a lot more scope, and also take on ideas and other studies and others suggestions about framing it, adding it to from the context of part 5, what it means, and it's all contained in one definition that would make it a lot cleaner and clearer. So workstream 2, I think that there's some good suggestions we can take back to consider, and also take your points about reaching out to the education department because they obviously know what's happening. Thanks.
Thank you. Jens, please.
Another food for thought in the audit regulation, which was now changed by the CSRD, there is an adding to the blacklist, which comprises in the old version bookkeeping and preparing accounting records and financial statements. And now it's added as well as preparing sustainability reporting. So it is clarified there. I don't want to say that this is right, but it is obviously something which has to be highlighted to make it crystal clear that these services are prohibited, and perhaps this is some food for thought for our definition too.
Thank you, Jens. I think it's a good point, and again, I think it would be a bit strange if this would remain completely untouched when we are making such a significant change to absorb sustainability. Moreover, and even if without, of course, wanting to discuss the technicalities of the word accounting, but if we Google accounting, we see immediately what it comes. It's the financial processing and measuring and etc. So we don't see anything anywhere that says that it's about sustainability. But anyway, even if I can admit that there can be some relationship between the two, we would be stuck with single materiality. This would leave double materiality out as far as I can see. So I think that we have to be careful here because we risk having here some reactions to the untouched nature of this definition, while the profession itself is moving and is expanding so much their role. But I agree that we shouldn't solve it probably today. Vanya, please.
Then just to disturb you a little bit, it's not by coincidence that the IESBA is under the IFRS Foundation. So the intention is for the future to sustainability and accountancy to work together. There is a commitment from IFRS Foundation that in the future, the regulation, the standards for accounting will be incorporating concepts and definitions of sustainability. In this first stage, they are dealing just with disclosure of sustainability information. But in the future, when they are safe enough that the measurements, the metrics, that they are substantially acceptable, then the intention is to record a sustainability effect as well. So
right, I acknowledge that, but I think that well, sorry for being so so bold on this, but you know that when I have convictions, I can be insistent. But I think that I'm fully understanding what you're saying, Vanya. First, I think that we are not there yet. Secondly, we know that they are supposed to walk together, but walking together does not mean being one and the same. It's like marriage. It's two different dimensions. Thirdly, I think that we are not there yet in terms of understanding, in terms of how people look at this new activity. So for me, reducing sustainability information, mostly when we intend to cover double materiality, which is a completely different animal with respect to at least the traditional concept of accountancy or accounting is. I think it's for me it's complicated, but let's listen to others. Jens, please. Okay, so well, Christelle, back to you.
Yes, well, we will embark all these comments and try to come back on Friday with a way forward, not the revised things, but a way forward, because they were very innovative propositions that have some impact on the way we would draft. And it's important that we make clear what we embark in our drafting now and what we postpone eventually. Thank you for this valuable input. No, it's we go now a little bit further on our last part on some additional Workstream 2 scope of work. The project proposal that was set out included, sorry, next slide, please, included a number of topics for Workstream 2 consideration. They relate to ethics issues, including whether ethics responsibilities should vary based on the PAIB's role and seniority in employing organizations. It also included whether a new section should be added to part 3 to guide the PAPPs engaged to assist their clients in sustainability related tasks and activities other than sustainability assurance. So on the first point we considered, this first issue as a broad and cross-cutting issue, but it does not seem to present relevant sustainability-related specificities. So in the proposed next strategic working plan, the potential new work stream on the role of CFO and other senior PAIBs could address this in a more holistic way. That's our consideration for now. On the second issue, we consider it is beyond the scope of sustainability project on reporting and assurance of sustainability information. And so if the board is agreeing on the work already scoped in the project for workstream 2, we would limit it under the current project. We ask if IESBA can consider these issues as separate work stream after all our discussions.
Thank you, Christelle. Views about the scope, the proposed scope of work?
No issue. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, let me just say that I wish I had a time machine and I was already in the future. It's calling us.
Okay, so this leads us to our last point, which is what's going to happen next. Next slide, please. Oh, no, doesn't. Last. So in September, we will present a full deck of standards, the new part 5, revisions to part 2 for the first readings and for the CAG's consideration. In order to be ready for that, we will meet again in July in London. We commit ourselves, or we have as an objective to coordinate with Workstream 1 to provide some documents to the board well ahead of the September meeting. So parts of it to help avoid a sort of tsunami of documents on the September board. So that and also we took an option for an additional task force meeting in October, if necessary, to fill the gap to our deadline of December. This is what we wanted to share with you.
Thank you, very promising. Comments on the timeline? Mark, behave. Okay, no comments. Everyone is in agreement.
No, I'm in agreement. It is for sure very challenging, and we see that on some key strategic elements, we still get some valuable input to refine things and to think it out of the box another way, etc. So, well, we still have the same deadline in mind. So,
yeah, and I'm sure that we are going to be able to meet the deadline, and it's necessary. This deadline is not a deadline that we decided to establish for ourselves. We are responding to very concrete, very specific, and very pressuring. To speak about pressure requests and urgencies that we did not create, we did not ask for, but which are there. And this is our opportunity, this is our momentum. And this was the idea since the very start of this project, is that we had a very short time frame within which we could become relevant. And this is the time frame that we have. We know what's happening as of 2025, the movements, the progresses that are being made, etc. So this is really our opportunity to do something which can fit together with other initiatives, and we have not much room. I would say we have no room at all to do it in a different timeline. So this is the risk that we accepted to take last year, 1 year ago or something like that, knowing that it was going to be challenging for everybody, very challenging, knowing that we are taking risks, knowing that not everything will be perfect by December 2024, but at least that we managed to put something together to build something which I'm sure, and what we have seen until now is going to be a meaningful, strong, robust, built upon and developed upon a very due process with extensive consultation and outreach and etc. With against the public interest framework for the first time in a very structured way with the oversight of the PIOB. So we have it all. I hope that we will survive to this next 18 months, but I'm sure we will also, because I think that we will have some additional incentives along the way, which will help us be sure that this is worth and this is necessary. Of course, we have to calibrate the effort of everybody here, and that's why we are, being careful about other things that we might be doing, additional things that we might be doing, etc. Because we are all, and I'm very aware of the effort that this means for everybody. But I think that what this discussion that we have been holding on last 2.5 days brings me is the conviction and the confirmation that we are all very much committed with these projects and with the deadlines as well. So thank you for that to everybody. But I think we will get there. I hope. I'm sure. Ken.
Thank you, Gabriela. Well, lunch is just around the corner, but just to maybe add to what you've just shared, Gabriela, in case anyone still had any doubts or reservation in terms of where we're going towards the end of the year, the Financial Stability Board, which I mentioned earlier, is going to mention or emphasize in its report, its progress report, that IESBA will be issuing or approving exposure drafts in December. So for the board, not approving the exposure draft in December is not an option. In case anyone had any doubts, it's no pressure, but it's not an option. On a lighter touch, so this afternoon social activities, just a few reminders. There are maps at the back in terms of where we're going. Secondly, for those who plan to go directly to the locations where we're going to have the gallery viewing, etc., and the restaurant. If you're not coming to the AFAC offices at 3:45, do let Astu or Diana know, because they are keeping a list of who is expected to be downstairs, so we can all get together. Thirdly, do bear in mind that the weather is sort of changing. It was sunnier this morning, and now the sun seems to have gone, so we might get a bit of rain. Do bring your umbrellas, and it's casual setting, so be comfortable. And finally, we have invited a few representatives from accountability to join the board for dinner. So we will have 4 of their people coming to join us, including Daniel Metzger and Pepe Emilia, who came to the board on Monday. So please engage with them and speak to them. Thank you.
I think it will be a good opportunity to ask them how they feel about the word accountancy. Daniel Metzger.
Good topic for discussion over dinner.
Thank you very much. See you later.